Oh, what a mess. This is Neil Schneider from Meant to Be Seen. Welcome back to my messy basement. Today, it's all about the out-of-home entertainment. A couple weeks ago, actually, we hosted Kevin Williams from the DNA Association, who specializes in the digital out-of-home market. So this is kind of a follow-up to that, where we're talking to two virtual reality arcade companies. The first being Ctrl V, which is based in Waterloo, Ontario, which I think is really cool because I'm a fellow from Ontario as well. And also Immersion Arcade, which is a new company in Normal, Illinois. Just a heads up about the interview segment. It was a three-way conversation, which I think is really cool. Unfortunately, we did have a little bit of an audio problem. What happened was, as you see, I've got all this mixing equipment. Everything was going really well. The levels were great and so on. And unfortunately, the one thing I was missing was the cable connecting the soundboard to the camera. That was the one element. So it's still audible. The editing worked out. You could hear everything, but it's just not going to be quite as polished as it normally is. It sounds very much like my messy basement. But nonetheless, we are going to be back with more right after this. Welcome back to my basement. To my immediate left is Ryan Brooks. He is CEO of Ctrl V. They're a Waterloo-based virtual reality arcade. To his right is none other than Derek Downey. He is CEO of Immersion Arcade. And to Derek's right is none other than Brian Jesse, who's CTO for Immersion Arcade. So we've never had three people on the show at the same time, so we're kind of breaking the laws of physics here. But welcome, gentlemen.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Glad to be here.
Really excited. Fan of the show.
So I gotta ask, my first observation, you're all running virtual reality arcades, which are, sound really cool, they look really cool, and yet you've got the most drab backgrounds, like white walls behind you. You gotta do something about how you position that business, guys.
It's not entirely
white. Oh, that's true. He's got that monoscopic logo going on there that you did with magic marker.
You guys got a leg up on us there, for sure.
Yeah, especially not.
So, gentlemen, why don't we open this up? I'm sure each of you has a wonderful story to share. Before we talk about what a virtual reality arcade is, how did you get into this business? What did you guys do prior? So Brian, why don't we start with yourself?
Sure. So I'm actually an elementary teacher by trade. I teach mostly grades 7, 8 students. I substitute. Prior to that, or I guess in tandem with that, I am the world's largest distributor of Ironman electronics. So I build custom circuits that make people's Ironman suits functional. Yeah, and then I started this as just VR has always been a passing hobby of mine in terms of just following its growth and price point when it became available January. It kind of, just said there's no way that the general public's going to be able to adopt this. So why not try and get out ahead and do something that can bring it to everybody. So
wait a minute, Iron Man suits, rewind a little bit. Can you elaborate just a touch? I mean, you can't exactly just gloss that over.
So I have a pretty significant following on YouTube for some of the stuff I've built. I've done my functional Hawkeye suits as well that have like the actual interchangeable arrowheads and just all remote controlled from a bow. It was a hobby that started and it got a lot of traction on YouTube, so I kept going with it. But that's taken a little bit of a backseat since we started this endeavor.
So I know it's a little off topic. Just so I know, are you into like remote control drones and helicopters and all that stuff too, or is that completely separate?
Yeah, actually, it's funny you say that. I don't know if it's handy, but actually that's what the latest project I've been working on is actually a piece of Iron Man armor that will fly to me from across the room and land on my arm. So it's not functional yet, but it's getting there.
Okay, so there's a follow-up episode in the works, you see.
Yeah.
So Derek, you're next. I mean, you're based in Normal, Illinois. So obviously, what you're doing is making the city sound even more exciting. What's your story? How'd you get into this?
Yeah, Normal has a lot of punchlines, so just the jokes never really get old. So I teach full-time at the Arts Technology program at Illinois State University. I've been doing it for about a year now, filling in for someone who's on sabbatical. And I met Brian a little over a year ago. We went to a music festival together. We went to Electric Forest, and that's how we met. And we've been friends ever since, and Brian will tell you his story, but basically Brian had this idea, and I was planning on, in terms of my life path, to pursue a PhD because I have a master's in science, a master's of communication, and that's not a terminal degree, so I can't be a tenured professor. I love teaching. It's really been a calling for me. So I was planning on doing a PhD, and then Brian had this idea, and I was just talking to some friends, and I'm like, I love this startup space that we're at right now, and I always loved coming here and hanging out, and I wanted to be a part of it, but I didn't know how. And so then I was talking to a friend, and I'm like, Brian really has a cool idea. I feel like I should really, jump in with that. And then she's like, you should jump in with that. And I was like, yeah, you're right. Okay, I should do it. And I called my parents, hey, life-changing decision. And they were like, yeah, go for it. I was like, oh, thank goodness. But yeah, and we're 26, by the way. Not 16, close to.
Good stuff. Good stuff.
Yeah.
And so Brian, I take it you were obviously one of the big influences in going down this path. How did you arrive at this? What's your story?
So I started out of college. I didn't graduate actually. I left.
We're like
complete opposites. Complete opposites.
Awesome.
But I worked for Wolfram Alpha, if you've ever heard of that, as a web developer. And I left my relatively stable job after a year there for a startup that I've been working for here in Normal. Helped co-found it back in 2012, and that sort of fostered this whole startup ecosystem that we have here now. We were kind of the first startup to really start to get traction that stayed in Normal. There were some that came out of Normal but went up to Chicago.
Normal is 2 hours south of Chicago, essentially.
Yeah. So, I've always been entrepreneurial, and a risk taker, and probably around late April, early March, I really wanted to buy. I had to have it, but I just could not justify buying it for myself.
He was complaining for a long time.
Yeah. I was watching videos like every day, like, this is the coolest thing. But yeah, then I realized, how did people get games back in the day when, you couldn't afford it? You went to the arcade. And so after 2 weeks of having the idea, I had already quit my job and spent $4,000 of my money to, build the first computer and order the first 5 and everything. And shortly after Derek came on.
Yeah, so he was making the plunge. And then I was just kind of there to help him because we were planning on doing a Kickstarter at first. And then once I sat down and helped him with the Kickstarter, I was like, this sounds really cool. This sounds feasible. And then I made the plunge. And then when he made the plunge, it was just a simultaneous thing. We're like, all right, well, I guess this is what we're doing. So yeah, he turned in his resignation for the startup. Did this full time.
Good stuff.
We've been at it. It was about May.
So before we go to the next point, I want to give a big shout out to Kevin Williams, because it wasn't just karma that we all got connected here. Kevin was on the show a few episodes back, and Kevin's the chairman of the DNA Association. He specializes in digital out of home, and he thought it'd be a good idea for us all to get connected here in my messy basement. So kudos for Kevin for helping make that happen. So now that, but just as a refresher, for people who aren't familiar, when we're talking about digital out-of-home or the digital out-of-home market, what are we referring to? Here, Ryan, you could take it away on this one.
Sure. I think it's just any type of experience that you'll go and do outside of your home. I mean, it's pretty descriptive. What you think of the movie theater, right? It's the stuff that you can get some experience at home, but generally to get a better version of that, you'll go for a destination location.
All right, good stuff. And so Derek, maybe you could elaborate. I mean, you speak of having a virtual reality arcade. What does that really mean? Can you help visualize that for people?
Essentially, it's the idea of having the equipment there and you're renting the equipment to play games that we've commercially licensed. So we do it in terms of time slots. We kind of sell 15-minute, half-hour increments. We'll do hour and a half, 2 hours, things like that. And then for our particular arcade and our location, how it works out, we have 20-something games so far, 22, 23, and People can switch at any point, whichever game they want to do, and they also, we allow as many people in your party as you want. So you can reserve the headset for an hour, and then if you bring 5 people, you can all switch out, and then all have fun within the course of that hour. And that works out well just with our space. So
good stuff. Now, Brian, if I may, and I think there's a tie-in for Ryan here as well, Derek's making it sound very, very easy to set up a virtual reality arcade, but you're the chief technology officer for Immersion Arcade, so I'm sure they keep you very busy. Can you talk about some of the stuff that you have to do to make an arcade like this possible?
Sure. So doing 1 or 2 buys is not necessarily a huge challenge.
It wasn't first.
Yeah, it wasn't first. But once you start to get into like the 3, 4, or more, you have to start worrying about things like interference. You have to worry about things like the user experience as well. So if it were just interference, that wouldn't be a huge issue. But you got to think about, okay, well now we got to put walls in. How are people going to deal with that wall? So we built it out of soft material and stuff like that, making sure all the controllers stay charged. So we've got got to wire all the stations so that they have the charging port available. Just all sorts of things. On the daily, we're dealing with some sort of malfunction or improving something all the time.
Okay, good stuff. Now, Ryan, you're a Canadian story. Always proud to hear a good Canadian story. As far as making these head-mounted displays available, for the public, it sounds kind of cumbersome. I mean, maybe cumbersome is not the right word, but maybe challenging is you've got to get people to get the gear on. They got to select the right game. They have to, probably have to move very quickly, so it's an efficient process. I know Ctrl V is a virtual reality arcade in itself, but is it doing additional services as well?
Yeah, and just before I get to that, I just want to address the fact that I love the fact that you asked the question, can you describe what a virtual reality arcade is like, instead of asking what is VR like, because it's much easier for us to describe what the arcade experience is like than the VR experience. So in terms of this whole approach and answering your question, we planned early on, like we knew that there's the most expensive part of this is going to be the labor cost. And every demo that you've ever seen of Vive prior to the arcade system popping up was always someone holding that cable, making sure that person didn't trip over it. They're doing a little explanation before they get in. And that is what we found was going to be the most cumbersome part of this, was having to educate everyone individually. So we, from the get-go, had an explainer video, a high-quality explainer video done up that basically breaks it down. People now, most of them have watched it before they come in, so by the time they get here, they just know what to do. And then in addition, we built our own software platform, which Immersion has shown interest in including in their facility as well, which basically automates the selection of the game within. It shows you now how much time is remaining in your session. You can call for help without having to yell, "I need an adult." And it's streamlined the whole process without giving them the ability to mess with all of the Steam settings that are on the back end that you have to go in and adjust otherwise. So we planned a lot of that in advance, and it's worked out pretty well so far.
So like 7 times a day. Something's wrong. Press the button below the thumb pad. Oh, okay. Yeah.
All right. Now, Brian, if I may ask, I mean, your content library, I'm sure it's a growing library. Is it the same as what you would get if you purchased you're using HTC Vive, I think. Is it readily available with a standalone HTC Vive, or do you have some stuff that's custom for a virtual reality arcade?
So, they're all consumer games, yes. We do have to go through, the Steam store and download them, just like, a regular consumer would. The other side of that is we have to actually go to the developers and say, hey, we would like to use this game for profit. So then in a lot of the cases, that turns out to mean that we pay them a fee, whether it be percentage or flat rate or however it works, to use that game. And there have been a couple of cases where we've gotten a version that was completely different than the consumer version. The first example off the top of my head is, before raw data came out, we had the alpha. And then we had the launch version of Brookhaven Experiment before it came out as well. So right now I'm working with companies like Colopal. They do Cyberpunk. They're going to do special versions for arcades for that. And there are a couple more that I've been in contact with that are talking about streamlining the arcade experience, specifically raw data for sure is doing that.
All right. Now, Ryan, if I could ask, I mean, obviously there's more than one arcade popping up. We've got one in Normal, Illinois, Waterloo. I know there's other companies involved in this as well, like Starbreeze Studios announced plans for a virtual reality arcade, and then, I mean, they're popping up in different parts of the world. How, are they making money? Like, is there, how popular are these services? I mean, you're personally excited, but what do the customers say?
So there's a two-part question, because the first thing is, are these other arcades making money? And that's actually a touchy subject right now, because an Immersion is a partner in us fighting this battle of the whole description that Ryan just gave of this is how to properly get content in your arcade has been completely ignored by the majority of ones that are opening up. I think to date we can count 4 facilities that are doing it legitimately, and the remainder are questionable. And there's a very easy indicator for us to know if they're doing it or not. But it's been very difficult for us to continue to compete with some of these. We're early stage, so I mean, it hasn't affected us hugely yet. But the fact that it's happening at all and it's only growing worse over week to week is going to be. They're going to make more money than we can, and we're going to end up having to charge more than they do. In order just to keep offering the same experiences. So that's a whole other issue.
Well, let's rewind that a little bit. So it is the concern that, you've got we'll call it, let's say you'll have the legitimate, dot the I's and cross the T's orgs or arcades where they have the relationship with the content maker, they're paying them a royalty or they're paying a set fee. And then you've got this other group that, and we're not naming names, we don't know, I don't know, but let's say these arcades pop up, and maybe they buy the game off the shelf, but they're effectively reselling it, but they don't necessarily have a relationship with the content maker. So from the point of view of suppliers, they have a competitive advantage where they're not paying fees, for. So it's almost a computer piracy issue, because even if they're buying it, they're not buying it for the purposes that was intended.
If I may, the best analogy I've come up with is, imagine you run a movie theater and you just went out and bought some DVDs and ran your movie theater that way, instead of licensing through the major motion picture studios.
Right.
You'd make quite a bit more money, and you could offer quite a bit more movies.
So, do you think what's the expression? Something's going to come home to roost? There's an expression, I forget the exact wording, but do you think the content makers are going to say, whoa, you can't keep a secret like that if people are going to keep going to your arcade and talking about everything they've experienced? That it does come back.
It's funny because some of them are trying. They'll list, here are the genres of games that we have, and we have 2 zombie games. Well, there's only 2 zombie games on Steam for VR right now, so it's pretty obvious which ones you're offering. But the bigger problem is, even if the developer is fully aware, the majority of the developers right now are indie, and they don't have the resources or even the wherewithal to go and attack every one of these little mom and pop shops that opens up that starts using their software and for a profit, right? So that's the bigger issue. That typically when you think of software piracy, you're thinking of the bigger developers that they'll come down and they have the ability to do that, even though they sometimes, Nintendo gets a bad rap for not letting people do Let's Play online. They kind of let up sometimes, but I think that this is a bigger issue now because it's small development teams that are being affected, and those even if it's a little bit of money, that little bit of money matters, right?
So let's rewind to my original question. So I would venture that the 2 groups here, and I'm sure there's others that you work with, are following that plan of paying out the royalties and coming up with agreements before playing the content. So based on that rule set, are you making money? How are you doing?
Yeah, I'll speak to ours first. So since opening, we're about 3 months in now. We've had about 5,300 people spend an hour in VR in our facility. And we have 16 VR stations.
Okay, good stuff. And Derek and Brian, how are you guys doing?
Yeah, we're at about, I'd say 300 people. We're a much smaller operation.
300, 400.
Yeah, 300, 400.
We don't even have our data systems fully in place yet.
And you guys haven't been open as long either.
No.
Yeah, 2 weeks,
2 weeks
short.
short.
Well, let me rephrase the question, because with any new business, sometimes it could take up to 3 years before you really turn a profit. I mean, you can't. It's unrealistic to have an overnight profit in many cases. But from the point of view of consumers taking an interest, paying for time, and that's the real measure. Are people paying to use it? If you've got limited supply, you do with what you have. But are you seeing that opportunity? Are people taking a direct interest in this with their wallets?
Like I said, that I guess that number is partially speaks for itself. But in addition, like the number of people that came back in June alone was about 20% of people came back a second time in June, and another 5% of our customers came back 3 or more times in the same month. So that was right out the gate, and that number's only increased in the past 2 months.
All right, good stuff.
Yeah, and for us, we haven't advertised whatsoever.
Except for this week.
Except for this week, Brian put together a Facebook advertisement in like one night. And what we do, one thing that we do with our business, because this was how we were planning on starting it, was we're a mobile setup. So we actually bring it out to events. And then we got an opportunity to have this location for very cheap. And so we went with that. So we brought our VR equipment out to maybe like a dozen or so different places, including the local library and a bunch of businesses in town. And we promoted ourselves that way. That's been our advertisement. And we're actually doing some more this weekend and stuff. And through that alone, we've been getting more traffic every week. It's been we've been making more money each month, and that's without advertisement. We've now just added some more people to our team, so we're really excited that we can finally start pushing that. And it's not Brian and I working 70 hours a week, keeping the location open.
Let me speak to your original question there, Neil. We've, in just the 2 months that we've been operating, we've made up our initial investment and are like leading into basically like our total investment, if that makes sense.
Right.
So we're within 2.5 months of operating. No, it's 2 months now. 2 months of operating, we've almost completely paid off the entirety of the initial investment.
Now, granted, we just bought 2 more Vives.
Right.
Like
So
it's
always a defect.
Yeah.
But yeah.
That's good stuff. Good stuff. So, one of the advantages all of you have is when people go to your virtual reality arcades, you get to see, which content they're going for, and I'm wondering if you're seeing any patterns, and you don't have to name particular games or particular experiences, but you could if you want. Are some things more popular than others? Like, are you finding certain trends in what the visitors like to go for? Derek and Brian, you're nodding away, so I'll let you go first.
For us, our market is mostly the underage crowd, so under 18. Job Simulator reigns absolutely supreme, 100% supreme. And it is due to the complete simplicity of it. The simplistic nature, you tell them, okay, the trigger is how you grab. And you don't have to tell them anything else. They just go.
Yeah.
And it's like a toy box. If you can imagine when you were a kid playing like House or Doctor or something like that, it immediately clicks in the child's mind and they're off to the races.
Dude, that's really like the only requested one we have, except, oh yeah, I saw the zombie game, but that like rarely ever happens. Job Simulator is the only actual request. The rest of them, people come in and, oh, I don't know, what do you have? Yeah, so.
And Ryan, do any standout titles or experiences?
Yeah, Job Simulator is up there for us as well. And I think part of it is also the fact that almost everything in that game is you can interact with it. Where some of the other games have like very limited pieces that are, well, but this is like virtually everything. You can pick up and throw or just mess around, right? And this is the sentiment seems to be that in VR, I don't have to clean it up right after I make that mess. There's no consequences to what I do in here. So that seems to be why that game is so popular. But in addition, I think Cloudlands Mini Golf or VR Mini Golf, that has been our number 2 and number 1 game for the past 3 months. And I wouldn't say it's the most graphically impressive, but it's one of the few multiplayer games that is not shooting, and therefore it's accessible to everybody, right? Everybody generally knows what mini golf is. They don't have to be explained how to play the game. It's literally, I get in, I can see and hear my friends, and they'll waste their entire time in there. I'm like, we have other games too. Like, yeah, but we just threw hole 9. We got to keep it. All right. So
they're committed.
Yeah, and what's really strange too, and I think this is product of my age as well, but it's weird seeing kids come in and they've never tried real world mini golf before. This is their first exposure to it. Is in VR. Like, this is really cool. Like, that exists in reality too, right? You can.
So it's kind of a symbiotic relationship. People go to your virtual reality arcade, and suddenly the mini pipe business goes up in the same week. Maybe there's a correlation in there somewhere.
And I would say with the Job Simulator, the YouTube phenomenon that it is, that's probably a major part of why it's like the only requested game. And then if we get to have a shout out for Rec Room, we are huge Rec Room fans. So like VR with the Vive was mind blowing, which is pretty awesome because like we invested our money and time into building this business before either of us had done the headset, obviously, because like it didn't even come out. And so then when we got it, I put it on and it was amazing, and I'm like, oh my god, oh cool, awesome. But so the VR itself was mind-blowing experience number 1. But then playing Rec Room for the first time and like really playing it, that was mind-blowing experience number 2 for me, because socializing in VR is next level. Being able to see the person and interact with them. I mean, and coming from StarCraft, where you're playing online and you're having chat conversations with people, and now suddenly you're seeing them and you're hearing them and you're interacting with them. And Rec Room, they just added that paintball. It's amazing. So Rec Room we really recommend with people because it's our only up to 4-player multiplayer game. And so multiple times we've had all 4 headsets with all 4 people playing at the same time. And that drives, that's kind of like what the customers want, and they request that kind of thing. And they want the multiplayer. And so everything else is like single player though. And so they play it, but the multiplayer is so huge. And when I did Rec Room for the first time, I was like, oh, Facebook bought Oculus. Like, this makes sense now because the socializing was crazy. Charades. It's so havoc, like anarchy. So much havoc.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the multiplayer, because I would venture that you guys collaborate. I mean, the different arcades, they probably know each other, and they learn about each other's businesses. Do you guys, have competitions? Like, is there opportunities there where you can, have...
That's a really good idea, Neil.
I never thought about that before, actually. Yeah.
No?
Yeah, we've been...
Are you guys free next week?
Yeah.
Maybe on Friday, or...
I think
we should pick the first ever international VR arcade tournament next Friday.
Yeah, you heard it here first.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. So, I've been reaching out to Ctrl V and VR Junkies for a while now, just because we heard that there were these other 2 arcades around, and we want to make friends, as many friends as we can in this industry. And so we had a phone call on the 4th of July. So, and we decided that it would be really cool if we did an inter-arcade tournament. And this is very much kind of hodgepodge thrown together. It's more of an experiment, honestly, than it is a tournament. It will be a tournament, but we are...
It's the first annual, so it has to be this one.
Right, it has to be this one. So we've decided we're taking leaderboards. So for us, we're having a specific event where we're all getting leaderboards for the top players for the games. For Ctrl V and VR Junkies, they've been keeping a leaderboard over the course of the last month or so. And the top 3 players of 4 different games are going to compete against each other over an 8-hour tournament. So 2 hours is going to be devoted consecutively, right, to each game. So Zortex from the lab for the first 2 hours. built Longbow from the lab for the next 2 hours, Space Pirate Trainer for the next 2 hours. I was about to say from the lab. No. Space Pirate Trainer, and then Brookhaven Experiment for the last 2 hours. And yeah, so our top 3 players from each arcade are going to kind of duke it out. And like we were just saying with multiplayer, these are all actually single-player games, but this is the test for what's to come. This is us practicing for the actual league. I mean, even my dad came in and was like, you know, you guys should have like, you should have bowling leagues with VR, you know, and that's the goal. And if we could make sure that everyone in that league is doing commercial licenses, maybe that's kind of how we do. Yeah.
So you mentioned it, commercial licenses. So let's have one more point. Before we were talking about the issue where people were not taking advantage of the available commercial licenses, you know, to implement into their virtual reality arcades. They were just taking content, you know, paying for it themselves and just using it. But then there's the other side is, you know, are commercial licenses readily available for the content that you want? Are there examples where it's not readily available? So Ryan said yep first, I think. So yeah. Ryan, you get to go first.
Well, I mean, so when I mentioned that the way that we know the indication that a facility has not licensed their content right now is Google Tilt Brush. And we've been talking with Google for months, trying to like convince them to make this available for commercial use, and they have been very they've been very like they're not budging on this. They don't want to do it. They appreciate us asking. They said they'll let us know if anything changes. Well, we see this advertised on every one of these other arcades, and the moment you know they have that, that means they have not done their due diligence for every other title in their library. There's no way, right? And so that's right now the indicator for us, and that's I know Google is looking to shift their view on that. They have done a survey to which I was able to complete on the last day of this survey, whatever. But they are going to make it commercially available in some capacity at some times. So that's the best example I can give you.
Good stuff. Derek, Brian, did you want to add to that?
Sure. I would say that it's not necessarily that people are unwilling to do commercial licenses, except for Google in that case. But some of the time, it's really a lot of back and forth. There is no standard in the industry, so you know it may be a 2-month conversation before you really come to terms and the other party is willing to deal with you. There have been a couple of developers that I've reached out to that just aren't ready. They've been waiting on Valve to figure out what to do, and Valve hasn't really. I would say they've been helpful enough, but they haven't put together something standard that everybody can use. And that would really solve this problem.
Yeah, as indie developers, I mean, they have to draw up legal contracts for a VR arcade, which has never existed before. And on top of that, if we want to license it commercially, then Brian has to do his creepy web developer sleuthing skills and really hunt down these contact information sometimes in order to even reach out to them. So there's no platform for us to reach out. It's not easy to do it this way. But it's right, like we're pumping up the developers. I feel like we're the good guys. We might be the Batman here.
So on that note, I'm going to brag a little bit, and if all goes to plan, I think you're all planning to come down to Immersed, yes? You're all speaking, yeah? So I think this is going to be an excellent opportunity that for content makers, if they want to find new places to get their content out there, they'll get to meet you in person. Maybe they'll show their stuff. And, that's what it's about, building new relationships and, making the industry work. So, gentlemen, thanks so much for visiting my basement today.
Absolutely.
Thanks for having us.
All right. We'll be back with more right after this. Thank you again for visiting me in my messy basement. If you want to be a guest on the program, by all means, send me an email, neilsmessybasement@mtbs3d.com. Also, of course, you could probably tell in each of our shows that we have a number of our speakers coming on the program. We're very excited about Immersed 2016, taking place October 16th to 18th at the Ontario Science Centre. This is a really big deal because in addition to being a core professional event, we're also having a consumer-facing event. We want people excited about immersive technology. We want to give them the opportunity to try out all the stuff that's in the market. We're really excited about this. So you can learn more at getimmersed.com. And of course, we're always looking for speakers, exhibitors, and so on. So we really want you all involved. On that note, I'm looking forward to catching up with you again next week.